Well, summer is really just around the corner, and one of my all-time favorite lures to fish during the summer is the good old Texas rig. I know that this is something that you may think is obsolete now with the advancements in technology, but a Texas rig will never not catch bass for the end of time. It is such a good bait. It is one that I have a tremendous amount of confidence in. It works in a number of areas, but in this video, I want to talk about three situations, three places that when I see them during the summer, I am picking up a Texas rig 9 times out of 10. Now, before we get into the video, this one's brought to you by Omnia Fishing. I was actually just looking at the Omnia's website and I didn't realize that they had so many sales going on right now on a ton of different products. And it's kind of across their site, a ton of different products. I mean, I saw chigger crawls, Berkeley chigger crawls. I saw D-bombs. I saw big worms. I saw a number of different products marked down like 20 to 25% on their website. So I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description. You can see all the different sales that they got going on and hopefully you can shop. It is a great way to help support this channel. All right, let's talk about Texas rig summertime fishing. And so let's talk about the first location. This is by far one of my favorite ways to catch them during the summer, and that is fishing around stumps in brush piles. And now when I am fishing stumps and brush piles, mostly I am fishing off of the bank, offshore cover. And this is by far, this is like something that I love to do, because the best thing about fishing offshore stumps, offshore brush piles, is you can fish a number of these throughout a day. One of the best things that I love to do is kind of get on a pattern of maybe, for example, catching fish on stumps, and then just try to run as many stumps and or as many brush piles as you can in a day. Now, the number one technique that I'm gonna pick up to fish on these stumps, on these brush piles, is a big Texas rigged worm of some sort. A Zoom Old Monster is one of my favorites. The X Zone. X Zone has a blitz worm. It's a really big, it's like an 11-inch worm. I really like those big worms for fishing around these stumps and brush piles. Now, one of the most important things, even more important than the tackle that you are going to use, and we'll talk about that with a big worm here in just a minute, but one of the most important things is finding the right brush piles in the right stumps, because some of the lakes that you will go to, there'll be a ton of these. They will be all over the lake. And no matter where I've been in the country, not only for just stumps and brush piles, but anything offshore related, the best thing that you can really do is find isolated stumps or isolated brush piles. If you kind of go down a creek channel and there's stump after stump after stump after stump, I'm not saying that you can't catch fish in those areas, but the stumps or brush piles that tend to produce the best and produce the most fish tend to be those ones that are a little bit more by themselves. And this makes sense, right? If the bass have a lot of different cover options to go to, then it's just kind of gonna spread those fish out. But if they only have one kind of piece of cover in a general area, it can really kind of congregate those fish. So a big thing that I highly suggest, spend some time out there idling around, looking for stumps, looking for brush piles that are isolated. Another huge component to finding good brush piles, good stumps, is kind of thinking about the bottom composition and what is around these stumps and brush piles. Because sometimes you'll find a stump, it's up on a flat, it's muddy, and you know what? They're not always that great. But if you can find a stump that is right on the end of a point, maybe that point drops off into deep water, that is just something that is different. It's a piece of structure with a stump as a piece of cover on top of it that can really hold a lot of fish. Other things that I like to look for as well, sometimes you will find bluegills spawning in a little bit deeper water, say 8, 9, 10, 12 foot of water. And there'll be days out there where you'll find a brush pile or a stump and it's right next to a bluegill bed. Those can be dynamite stumps or brush piles. It is a great way to catch them. But with that being said, like I said, I pick up a big worm in this situation. I like to fish a big worm typically on 16 or 17 pound fluorocarbon, a 7 foot 3 inch medium heavy power rod with a fast action. That is my setup that I really like. typically that big worm is gonna be with a 3/8 ounce or a 1/2 ounce weight, depending on how deep I am fishing it. That's kind of my setup. All right, let's talk about number 2. The area that I like to fish a lot during the summer. This is probably my number 1 place. Like if I can find this on any given body of water, it's where I really enjoy fishing. And the best thing about it is electronics can help you, but you don't always need them, and you don't always, for example, it doesn't always help you tremendously. And that is fishing outside grass lines. You know, in a lot of lakes that we fish, you're gonna have hydrilla, you're gonna have coontail, you're gonna have especially milfoil, you're gonna have other species of grass, especially up in the northern part of the country, where they will grow out. They're more submergent grass. They're typically below the surface, but you will get to an area where they stop. You know, sometimes these fish, the grass will grow out 6, 8, 10, 12 foot deep, 14 foot deep or so, and they'll grow all the way to the top. But where you have that grass line, that outside edge of a grass line, that is where you're gonna find a lot of bass in the summer. Now, when I go about fishing these areas, I am trying to just flip and pitch the edges most of the time. Most of the time, I'm gonna use kind of a similar setup to what I just talked about, but a different plastic bait. For me, I like a 3/8 ounce or a 1/2 ounce weight a lot of times. If it's really deep or the cover is a little bit thicker, I will go with a 3/4 ounce. And I'm usually gonna use a more compact style bait. So in the brush piles and in those stumps, I'm gonna use the big worm. When I'm fishing grass, I typically like a more compact bait, whether that's a little crawl of some sort. For me, I love a D-bomb, which again, that's on sale right now. I also love a sweet beaver. You know, those style baits, I love the Berkeley, what is it? I can't think of it. Pit Boss. That is a great bait. Those baits, those compact baits, I really, really like. I'm also gonna peg my weight when I'm fishing around grass a lot of times to help that weight and bait to not separate. Now, when I'm fishing that, I didn't mention this, but when I'm fishing that big worm offshore, I actually like to keep that weight unpegged if possible. Sometimes you will fish really brushy brush piles, ones with a lot of little sticks in them. It can be very difficult at times to more or less get that bait through with not having it pegged. So in those situations, I will peg my weight in those really sticky, brushy brush piles. But for the most part, if I can get away with not pegging a weight, I always like to do so because I think it gets me a lot more bites. All right, let's talk about situation number 3. And this is probably my favorite of all of them. And it's similar to what I just talked about with the outside grass lines, but in this situation, one thing I didn't mention with those outside grass lines, because you can go to lakes where they are all over the place, like you will have miles of grass lines, and what helps separate a good grass line from a bad grass line typically are some sort of irregularity in the grass. So if you have a straight grass line, not always gonna be great. If it comes out and makes a point, that's gonna be where they are. If it goes in and makes more of a cut, that's gonna be where they are. Also, if you can have some sort of rock or harder bottom that butts right up into that grass or even inside of that grass, that is a really, really dynamite place to fish. And the best thing about this is, like I said, you can use your electronics to some degree to fish this grass, but sometimes it's a visible thing. You can see the grass down there, you can see it with your own eyes, and a lot of times you just have to fish through a lot of grass to find those little areas, those little hot spots, those little zones where there's a lot of fish. All right, let's talk about number 3 here, which is my favorite of all of them, and that is punching. I absolutely love to punch through matted vegetation. And sometimes it's not mats. Sometimes you go to certain lakes and you'll have wood piles that actually collect in little pockets, and you can actually punch through those wood piles or even sawdust type piles with a heavy Texas rig. Now for me, I fish a lot of vegetation, and I absolutely love this because it catches big fish. It's such a fun way to fish, you know, and it's like, it just fit you versus the fish, mano y mano type thing. Like, it is so much fun. You guys have been around the channel, Bass Fishing HQ, this one, you know that I love to punch. Now, the big thing with punching is trying to get away with the smallest weight that you can while still being efficient. You do not want to see a mat out there and flip it in there and really have to work that weight to go through the canopy. You want it to go through without really having to sit there and jiggle it a bunch or make multiple pitches, but I want to go with the lightest weight that I can, because bigger weights will just cause a lot of issues. If you're getting over an ounce and a half, I mean an ounce and 3/4, 2 ounce weights, there's even 2.5 ounce weights, they just cause a lot more issues. Yeah, you might be able to punch through that stuff real easily, but a lot of times these are the weights that you will lose a lot of fish with. Not only because they pop that fish's mouth open on the hook set, but also it's just a lot of weight for that fish to swing. It's like when you fish a 2 or 3 ounce glide bait, it's a lot of weight for that fish to swing, which can lead to a lot of issues with losing fish. So try to get away with the lightest weight that you can while still being efficient. Very, very important. Now on the back of a punch rig, I really like small baits. My absolute favorite that I use a lot is a Zoom Speed Crawl. It's a little 3.5 inch bait, and I have used that from Florida to New York and everywhere in between and caught a ton of fish on a Zoom Speed Crawl. Now the big thing with mat fishing, again, what kind of separates a good mat from a bad mat? There's a number of things. One, the thickness of the mat. If you can find a mat that is thicker in places than the rest of that mat, typically that really thick area is going to be where the bass is. That thick area is very dark. And like we talked about a few days ago with shade, bass like a shade. It's going to keep that water temperature cooler, especially in the hot, hot summer. And there's going to be a lot of bass in those areas. Now, the other thing is, again, kind of like brush piles, isolation. If you can find mats that are isolated by themselves, those can really, really be good. Sometimes I've seen it where you're fishing big lily pad fields, but there'll be just these random isolated mats within the lily pad fields. Those are really, really good. They're typically better than when you kind of like get into an area where there's a humongous mat, where half of the area that you're fishing is just this giant matted vegetation. So guys, those are my 3 favorite places to fish a Texas rig in the summer. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to check out Omnium, and I will see you guys tomorrow.